The woods have always been my sanctuary. I've been a hunter since I was a teenager, and the solitude of the deep forest is my church. I know these particular woods like the back of my hand, a sprawling national forest that sees little traffic. This trip was supposed to be a standard 2-day hunt, a quiet escape from the noise of the city. I was miles from the nearest trail, moving through a thicket of old-growth trees, when I found the first one. It was a single, small animal skull-eye. Think a raccoon perfectly clean and bleached white, with a bright red ribbon tied to a branch of a low-hanging tree. The ribbon was clean and new, the bow a perfect, symmetrical knot. I stood there for a moment, confused. This wasn't a marker, a prank, or a trail sign. It was simply wrong. The woods were a place of raw nature, of decay and rebirth. This was artifice. I untied the ribbon and left the skull on the ground, telling myself it was just a strange, isolated incident. Probably the work of a bored teenager. The memory of it, however, stuck with me. An unsettling detail in an otherwise perfect day. As I continued on, the sun dipping lower in the sky, I found another one. This time, it was a deer jawbone, its teeth still in place, tied with a bright blue ribbon to a pine branch. It was just off the main path I was following, almost hidden, but in my direct line of sight. A cold dread began to seep into my bones. This wasn't a coincidence. This was deliberate. The woods, which had always felt so open and welcoming, now felt like a place I was being led through. My sense of direction, which had always been perfect, began to feel distorted. The trees looked the same. The paths all seemed to curve back on themselves, and I had the distinct, chilling feeling that I was no longer navigating the woods, but being guided by them. My mind tried to find a rational explanation, a new, strange, cultural practice, a group of artists, but the dread was too visceral, too real. That's when I started to hear the sound, a faint, low clicking, like bones knocking against each other, a rhythmic sound that seemed to come from all directions at once. It was so subtle that I initially thought it was just the rustling of leaves or the tapping of a woodpecker. But the rhythm was too perfect, too steady. It was the sound of a countdown, of something moving slowly, deliberately, toward an unknown destination. I finally decided to turn back to my cabin, but no matter which way I turned, I found myself facing another ribbon. They were now everywhere, each one a different color, each one tied to a different kind of bone, a collection of small vertebrae tied with a yellow ribbon, a femur with a pink one. The clicks grew louder, more insistent, a chilling soundtrack to my growing panic. I wasn't just finding the markers anymore, they were being placed for me. The trail of ribbons and bones led me deeper and deeper into a part of the forest I had never seen, a part that felt ancient and untouched. I ran. I abandoned my hunting gear, my rifle, everything. My only goal was to get back to my cabin, to the relative safety of a known place. The clicking sound was a constant, loud rhythm. Now, an unbearable sound that seemed to be coming from right behind me. I pushed through a thicket of brush and stumbled into a small, unnatural clearing. The ground was flat, packed dirt, not the usual soft moss and pine needles. In the center of the clearing, surrounded by a perfect circle of large, gray stones, was a figure. It was a doll, a large, crudely made effigy of a person, woven from sticks and branches, and bound together with twine. But its head was not a piece of wood. It was a human skull, bleached white, its empty eye sockets staring at me with a horrible, knowing emptiness. The clicking sound was deafening now, and I realized with a gut-wrenching horror that it was coming from the doll itself. I was transfixed, my feet rooted to the ground. Then, I saw its hands. They were holding a long, thin bone, and tied to one of its wrists was a familiar bright blue ribbon, the one I had seen on the jawbone earlier. I looked at the doll's head, at the empty eye sockets, and watched in a moment of pure, unadulterated terror as the skull slowly, silently, turned to face me. its gaze seeming to burn through me, to see all the way to my soul. I don't remember running from that clearing. I don't remember how I got back to the cabin. I just remember the feel of my lungs burning and the raw, scraping terror in my throat. I didn't stop until I was in my truck, driving down the gravel road, the sound of the clicking still ringing in my ears. I never went back to those woods. I sold all my hunting gear and haven't set foot in a forest since. Sometimes, late at night, I wake up in a cold sweat, hearing the faint, rhythmic clicking of bones. I see the doll's head, slowly turning, and I know that I wasn't the one who found the markers in those woods. The markers found me, and the last one, the human skull tied to the doll, was a hint of what was coming next. The woods have always been my studio. For 20 years, I've made a living as a wildlife photographer, spending weeks at a time in the deepest, most remote forests to capture a single shot of a reclusive animal. The solitude is a necessity, a tool for my trade. On this particular expedition, I was in a rarely visited part of a national park, hunting for a glimpse of a rare gray owl. I was 2 days in, deep in the thickest part of the forest, when I saw it. It was a small, crudely built trap, a loop of knotted twine tied between two young saplings. What was unsettling wasn't the trap itself, but the bait. Tucked into the center of the loop was a small bundle of what looked like human hair, shiny and dark against the brown of the forest floor. The trap was empty, and the bait was clean. I took a few photos, a cold dread settling in my stomach. This was too strange to be a hunter's trap, and it was too deliberate to be accidental. It was a sign of a person who shouldn't have been in these woods, a person with a disturbing sense of what to leave behind. I told myself it was a poacher, or a strange survivalist with methods I didn't understand. I documented it and moved on, but I couldn't shake the image of that small, disturbing bundle. The next few days, I found more of them. The traps became more numerous and more elaborate, found in the thickest parts of the forest, always in places where an animal would naturally travel. One was a small pit covered with sticks and leaves, with a single, perfectly braided rope, made of what looked like gut or sinew, hanging over the edge. Another was a complicated series of knots and loops, tied with thin fibrous strands I couldn't identify. I stopped looking for animals and started looking for the traps, my original purpose forgotten. The woods, which had always felt so open and natural, now felt like a meticulously laid out maze, a carefully curated hunting ground. The silence, which had been a comfort, was now broken by a strange sound that seemed to follow me. It was a low, almost subsonic clicking, a hollow rhythmic sound that seemed to come from the trees themselves. A sound of wood and bone. It was subtle, but it was persistent, and it was everywhere. I started to feel like I was not just alone, but being watched, being followed. The woods felt less like a home for animals, and more like a home for something else. I tried to set up a small camera trap, a standard motion-activated one, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever was setting these things. I left it there for a day, and when I returned, I found it disassembled, its pieces scattered across the forest floor. The memory card was gone. In the wet mud nearby, I saw them footprints. They were small and impossibly long, bare footprints that stretched out, as if whatever made them had toes that bent and curled in a way that no human foot could. The clicks grew louder, and the fear turned from a cold dread into a hot, suffocating panic. I was back at my tent, the clicking sound a constant drumbeat in my ears, my mind racing. I had a single last resort camera, a high-tech model with a live video feed, and I decided to place it on a large, sturdy tree facing the direction I had seen the strange footprints. I turned it on, the screen showing me a live view of the dense forest, and huddled inside my tent, my heart pounding in my chest. The screen was just a static image of trees for what felt like an hour. Then, I heard a loud, sharp snap, and the live feed flickered. The camera's motion sensor had been tripped. My breath caught in my throat as I watched the screen, my eyes wide with terror. A figure moved through the trees, a blur of motion, impossibly fast and impossibly thin. It was human-like, but its limbs were long and spindly, bending at angles that defied physics. It moved with a jerky, unnatural grace, its movements a horrifying parody of a person walking. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its body was a dark, slender silhouette against the backdrop of the trees. The figure stopped, not more than 20 feet from the camera, and it turned. It turned its head, slowly and deliberately, and looked directly into the lens. It was then that I saw what it was holding. It was a small, braided rope, intricately woven with a disturbing precision. It was the shutter release cable from my first camera, the one that had gone missing. The figure then raised a single, long finger to its lips, a horrifying, silent gesture, as if to say she, and it looked not at the camera, but past it, directly at my tent, at me. I ran. I didn't stop to pack anything. I didn't grab my gear. My tent? My camera. I ran through the woods, the sound of the clicks fading behind me. The image of that thing burned into my mind. I eventually stumbled onto a main road, a total wreck, and flagged down a passing car. The authorities found no evidence. The camera and its memory card were gone. I never went back to the woods. I can't shake the image of that figure. Its strange, impossible body. Its silent, knowing gaze. The worst part, though, isn't the memory of the creature. It's the memory of that braided rope, a symbol of a mind that wasn't just hunting, but playing a game with me, a game that I had just lost. The terrifying thought that whatever was out there, it knew I was watching, and it wanted me to know that it was watching me, too. The woods behind my family's old farmhouse were my childhood kingdom. I knew every trail, every gully, every ancient oak tree. I've spent my entire life in those woods, and the deep, rich smell of the earth and the sound of the wind through the leaves are as familiar to me as my own reflection. This particular day, I was on a peaceful foraging trip, a hobby I've had since I was a kid. I was looking for morels and chanterelles, my head down, my senses attuned to the nuances of the forest floor. That's when I found it. It was a small, perfectly round hole, about the size of a coffee cup, dug into the soft earth, and sitting next to it, facing away from me, was a small, crudely made clay figurine of a human. It was primitive, with a bulbous head and a small, featureless body. The clay was a strange mixture of dark earth and something else, a reddish, almost fleshy color. It was dirty, as if it had just been pulled from the ground. I stared at it, my peaceful mood shattered. I knew every kid in this town, and none of them would be out here, this deep in the woods. It wasn't a prank. It was too isolated, too strange. I left it alone and continued on my way, trying to rationalize it as a forgotten toy or a strange bit of folk art. But the image of that dirty, featureless little figurine sitting next to that strange hole stayed with me, an unsettling stain on a place I had always considered sacred. As I moved deeper into the woods, the feeling of unease grew into a cold, hard dread. I started finding more of them, not just the one hole, but a series of them, each one a little larger, a little deeper than the last, and with each hole, a new figurine, each one more detailed and more disturbing than the one before. The second one was a small, lifelike rendition of a person's torso with tiny, intricate ribs carved into the clay. The third one was a full body with strange, long limbs and a head that was tilted to the side, as if listening. The clay was still that disturbing reddish-brown color, and the figures were always placed next to the hole, always facing away from me, as if they were watching something I couldn't see. The holes were not random. They were a path, a trail laid out with a sickening, deliberate purpose. My foraging trip was now a terrifying journey. I started to hear a faint scraping sound from beneath the ground, a sound of something moving in the earth itself. It was a wet, grating noise, and it seemed to come from all directions, an omnipresent presence that I couldn't escape. My childhood kingdom, my sanctuary, was now a place of profound and unnatural horror. I no longer felt like a forager. I felt like a trespasser, an interloper in a world I didn't understand. I decided to turn back, to get out of the woods. But when I turned around, I saw another hole, another figurine, right in the middle of the path I had just taken. They were not just a trail, they were a net, and I was trapped. I was running now, a primal fear driving me forward, away from the path of holes, trying to find a way out of the woods. The scraping sound was a constant presence, a wet, frantic digging that seemed to be coming from right under my feet. My panic, however, was a poor guide, and I found myself in a small hidden grotto I had never seen before. It was a clearing of moss and ferns, with an ancient oak tree in the center. In the middle of the grotto, I saw it, a large, freshly dug grave, a dark, gaping hole in the ground, and sitting on the edge of the grave was the last figurine, the largest one. It was a lifelike, detailed sculpture of a human, with every sinew and muscle group horribly represented in the clay. Its face was a work of art, a horrifyingly detailed, lifelike portrait of a person in a state of pure, primal agony. It wasn't a child's toy. It was a masterpiece of dread, and it was sitting on the edge of that grave, looking not at me, but at the empty space beside it. I realized with a good trenching horror that the holes weren't meant for planting something, they were meant for something to come out of the ground. The scraping sound was deafening now, and it was coming from right beneath my feet, the sound of dirt and rock being pulled away by something relentless and powerful. The figurine on the edge of the grave was a portrait of the thing that was coming, a warning of what it was, and the grave was waiting for a body that was not its own. I ran from that grotto, my mind a blank slate of pure, unadulterated terror. I don't remember how I got out of the woods. I just remember the feeling of the ground trembling beneath my feet, and the sound of the scraping getting closer and closer. I stumbled out of the tree line hours later, a complete wreck, covered in mud and dirt, but alive. The police, when I finally calmed down enough to call them, found nothing. No grotto, no holes, no figurines, no grave. They chalked it up to a delusion, a panic attack brought on by a long day in the woods. I never went back into the woods behind my house. I sold the property and moved to a city, trying to put as much distance between myself and that feeling as I could, but I can't escape it. Sometimes, late at night, I feel a strange, cold presence under my bed, a sense of something patiently waiting, and I can't shake the image of that lifelike figurine and the terrifying thought that it was meant to be a portrait of the thing that was coming.